is now 9 p.m. on the East Coast, USA. I'm Ben Swann. Here are the stories we're following right now. First, the Trump administration may be changing what winning in Iran means. We're tracking the latest out of the conflict in the Middle East. Plus, we show you another disturbing video out of Ukraine, this one shedding light on the true human cost of this war. And finally, a horrifying allegation from the U.S. medical system claims that patients were still showing signs of life when organs were removed. And now the federal government is demanding answers. You know, on this show, we know you don't need more content, but what you do need is context. Anyone can tell you what's happening in the news. Tonight, we hope to help you understand why it's happening, how it's happening, and how it affects you. This is America Now. You know, when it comes to Iran, there are so many mixed messages continuing to move through the media and to come out of Washington. How do you know what is true and what is not regarding this war? You know, every night we say, you just heard it, context over content. And tonight, we hope that that will help you to understand what is actually happening. See, there's a new report from the Wall Street Journal that says President Trump has told aides that he may be willing to end the war with Iran without securing a new nuclear agreement with Iran if the Strait of Hormuz is fully reopened. So in other words, the nuclear issue may no longer be an issue at all. Hormuz is an issue that, we have to point out, did not exist before the war, but exists now because of the war. Earlier today, when asked about Hormuz, Trump had this to say.
The Strait of Hormuz right now is the United States Navy. We have a blockade that's been infallible. It's a steel wall, and we let people in that we want to let in, and those people come in, and they've been coming in and they're going out. So it's actually open now. We do not let them go into Iran.
You heard what the president said there. Today, the Strait of Hormuz is open now under the control of the United States Navy. But Tehran is now demanding compensation, sanctions relief, and the withdrawal of U.S. forces and an end to the naval blockade. See, Trump continues to insist negotiations are underway, but Iran's foreign minister says that's simply not true. He says no negotiations are taking place, just messages through intermediaries. That's not diplomacy moving forward. That is a stalemate. And in that scenario, Iran wins. We have told you since the first days of this war, in order to win, Iran only has to not lose. For Washington, it's a very different story. Tonight, President Trump and his administration are desperately trying to find some kind of off-ramp here. And as that happens, the U.S. military is running into a new problem, one that's even harder to solve. We've been telling you about this, weapons. See, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, estimates say that the U.S. PAC-3 stockpiles have fallen from 2,330 to fewer than 850. That is a 65% expenditure rate. The administration says, no, don't worry, there is no problem here with weapon stockpiles. But tonight we can tell you that is not true. What's the context for that? Well, just days after reports of a furious Trump call over extreme munition shortages, the Deputy Defense Secretary, Steve Feinberg, he gave defense contractors, this just happened, a deadline, 21 days. 21 days to come up with plans to rapidly increase production and delivery of critical weapons. And the missile shortage, by the way, it's only getting worse. Deputy Defense Secretary Feinberg says years-long development cycles are not acceptable and that the U.S. must dramatically accelerate production. See, the Pentagon just awarded Lockheed Martin up to $58.6 billion for PAC-3 missiles. And it's now working with Lockheed and Northrop Grumman to surge production of PAC-3 and THAAD. Because the problem isn't 5 years from now. The problem is right now. And we're not just talking about American stockpiles, by the way. Saudi Arabia is reportedly burning through about 86% of its pre-war PAC-3 inventory, dropping from roughly 2,800 interceptors to about 400 left in the first weeks of this conflict. So think about this. The United States is trying to rebuild its own missile defense while its allies are also running low. And that brings us to the bigger question. What exactly did 5 months of war accomplish? Mind you, it's only been 5 months. Because Ukraine has already spent years using the West's most advanced weapons against Russia. And a former Ukrainian commander just said this.
Застосувала усі види озброєнь, ну, окрім хіба що томагавків, окрім хіба що ядерної зброї, окрім хіба що авіаносців, окрім хіба що літаків F-35, які є на озброєнні НАТО, і застосувала доктрини їхнього застосування. Це ресурс вичерпаний.
Yeah, what he's talking about there is that Ukraine used every possible Western superweapon, and Russia simply adapted to them. That doesn't mean the weapons are useless. It means that the old assumption that technological superiority automatically produces victory, well, that's being tested. And there's another problem here. We can't even necessarily build these systems fast enough. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon have reportedly resisted licensing Patriot production to Ukraine because of concerns that Ukrainian manufacturers could eventually improve the system and build them faster and cheaper. So you have a Western military-industrial complex that can produce some of the most sophisticated weapons on Earth, but not necessarily in the quantities required for a prolonged, high-intensity war. That is a huge problem. And then there's this. Britain has discovered that cameras installed on its new K-3 Scout, those are the uncrewed surface vessel drones intended for the Gulf and for the Strait of Hormuz, had Chinese-made components that were secretly transmitting data to an IP address in China. The cameras are reportedly still active even when the drones were switched off. And some of the drones were operating near highly sensitive meetings involving British Special Forces. The same model has also been purchased by U.S. Special Operations Command. Are you with me? So let's put all this together. America running low on interceptors. We've been telling you about that. We now know allies are even lower on their interceptors. The Pentagon is demanding that defense contractors accelerate production by years. Not sure it's even humanly possible because of supply chain issues. And British surveillance drones intended for this very conflict zone were transmitting data to China. And Iran, by the way, what about them? The country we're supposed to force into submission 5 months ago is now in a position to say, if you want Hormuz open, then here are our terms. And then there's Yemen. The Houthis continue launching drones and ballistic missiles against ports and targets controlled by pro-Saudi forces. And just days after Saudi Arabia signed a new mutual defense agreement with Pakistan and Turkey, 2 major Aramco facilities reportedly suffered fires. The cause and the attribution of those fires remains unclear. But the strategic message is hard to miss. The war is no longer confined to Iran. It's spreading across the entire region. And the risk is that Yemen becomes the next front. Because if the Houthis can continue putting pressure on Saudi Arabia and on their infrastructure, while the Saudi air defense stockpiles are already depleted, that new defense pact may get tested very quickly. And here's where this whole story comes full circle. Because on top of everything else we've been talking about, Iran is tonight demanding reparations. Yes, $300 billion in compensation, the release of $100 billion in frozen Iranian assets, and the withdrawal of all U.S. forces across the Middle East. In response, President Trump says he wants reparations of his own.
They asked for reparations, you might say, or they asked for money for the damage that we've done. I said, that's a good idea. Well, we're going to ask for money for the damage they've done over a 50-year period.
I know we're throwing a lot at you here tonight, but there is actually more, because tonight an advisor to Iran's parliament speaker says Iran doesn't expect to reach a deal with Trump at all. The strategy here now appears to be just wait him out. The advisor says that Iran will manage the conflict through denial, ambiguity, and strategic patience. Neither war nor peace until it believes it has achieved victory. And then, of course, there is Hormuz itself. Iran says the Strait of Hormuz remains closed until its conditions are met. What are those conditions? Remember, we told you about this. $300 billion, $100 billion, frozen assets released, U.S. forces out of the region, and if necessary, they will wait to reopen the Strait of Hormuz until 2029, when Trump is out of office. So while Washington is talking about negotiations, Iranian outlets are saying that they have ruled out future negotiation with the Trump administration. Is it true? We're not sure. Iran, though, may be preparing to wait for the clock to run out. So the question is no longer who can drop more bombs. The question is who can afford to keep going. Because this may be the real lesson of the Iran war. You can have the most advanced military on earth. You can have the most expensive missiles, and we certainly have both of those. You can have the best technology, but if you don't have enough of it, and if you can't replace it, and if your enemy figures out how to adapt to it, then technological superiority stops being a strategy. It actually becomes a countdown. And right now, Washington is counting missiles, while Iran is counting days. And the entire world continues to watch the Strait. So joining us now to discuss this conflict, I'm joined now by David T. Pyne. He is currently the executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, recently served as Defense and Foreign Policy Officer to former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. So good to have you on.
Hey, Ben, great to be with you.
All right, let's run through a little bit of this. You know, I saw a tweet today, and it said, I'm not sure I agree with it, but this is the tweet from Chris Christie. He says that President Trump is now in the worst position he could possibly be in. He's at risk of becoming Jimmy Carter, being in a position where he can't do anything with Iran, and he walks out of this presidency basically humiliated. Do you think there's any accuracy to that idea? And is it a potential, or can he turn this thing around?
I think that's exactly the analogy that I've been thinking of as well. Great minds think alike, I guess. During the Jimmy Carter years, of course, I think there were 444 days or thereabouts of, up to 56 or so U.S. diplomats being held hostage by Iran when they captured the embassy. And that crisis didn't end until a new president came to office. And as soon as Ronald Reagan walked in the office, it was the same day that Iran chose to release the hostages. So I think that is really the strategy that Iran has in mind. Essentially, you need to turn the page on Donald Trump. We're not going to work with him, and we're going to make his life as miserable as possible, including, with a massive Democrat blue wave on November 3rd, retaking control of both houses of Congress. They've said they work with J.D. Vance. They trust J.D. Vance. So I can see them ending the war on the first day of a J.D. Vance presidency, but they'd also be very happy to see a Democrat in office. Given the fact that the Democrats, unlike the Republicans, seem pretty united against the war.
Yeah, they certainly do. You know, what's so interesting and actually a little bit depressing, to be honest with you, is that, Trump was specifically elected for a number of reasons, but a major part of that was we won't have World War III. We won't have a war with Iran. The president says, I never promised that. He actually literally promised specifically there would be no war with Iran and that we would get that with Kamala Harris. And so I feel to some extent that this president was kind of set up by the information he was given. He was given, I think, bad information. He was promised that this was going to be easy. It was going to go so well. This has railroaded everything about this second term. It has, in my opinion anyways, it has railroaded everything he could have done domestically. It's railroading everything he could do in terms of foreign policy. And it actually leaves the U.S. looking, honestly, on an international stage, a little pathetic. To see how we've burned through the kind of missiles that we have, to see how low our stockpiles are. I don't think any country in the world, even though they're all watching and they're all spying, right? I don't think anybody would have actually expected that we have as few interceptors as we have. We have as few PAC-3 and THAAD missile that we do. And a lot of that, obviously, is we've given so much to Ukraine. But it's left us in such an exposed position. There's going to be a lot of work to be done just to repair the image of the United States as a real force around the world. Do you agree with that? Or do you think I'm overstating that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. This war has been an epic fiasco. I predicted it would be both before the war and within the first few days of the war. I said it would be a guaranteed U.S. strategic defeat. It'd be humiliating. It would weaken us in terms of the regional balance of power in Iran's favor. It would transform the global balance of power in Russia's and China's favor. It would hurt us, as you mentioned, militarily in terms of our stockpile. I said that we were at risk with losing our conventional military superpower status, because you can have a big navy, you can have aircraft carriers, but if you don't have munitions and missiles and missile interceptors, you can't credibly station those off the coast of China or Taiwan and expect that you'll be able to prosecute or fight a war, or even perhaps even deter a war. An act of aggression against Taiwan. So I think Trump has really shot himself in the foot. He pledged to put America first. He pledged to end our forever wars. He pledged not to start any new wars. He started like 3 or 4 wars. This is by far the worst. It's the biggest regional war that we've fought probably since the Gulf War. And it's one that's, it's really transformed Iran from a medium power into a great power and a potential regional hegemon over the Persian Gulf, as it's exposed, as you mentioned, that the U.S. military looks impotent. It looks, Iran is like laughing in our face. They're not begging for peace. They don't even want peace anymore because they know they can't trust President Trump. They're deliberately putting out these unacceptable terms that they know will reject. And of course, they'd be happy if we accepted them. But they know we'll reject because they're in a position of power and they hold most of the cards.
You know what's interesting is I think that the U.S. might accept them. I think the Trump administration might accept them. Look, $300 billion, they might give it to them. We give millions of dollars every week to the Taliban. We just do it quietly and no one really pays attention to it. It just kind of happens, but we do this all the time, right? $100 billion in frozen assets that we could release, sure. If Trump would do it quickly, agree to it, make something happen. Yes, he's going to be criticized. Yes, he'll be laughed at for it to some extent. But people have a short memory. What they don't have a short memory for is a prolonged, protracted, it's in front of you all the time. So he would almost be better off if I were advising the president, not that he'd ever listen to anything I would say, listen, Mr. President, just do it. Just make it happen fast, and you can still declare victory, because that's what Trump does best. He trips and falls and says, I meant to do that, right? He misses a catch, and he says, yep, that was intentional. It's all part of the plan. And there's a certain segment of the population, by the way, that agrees. No matter what he does, they say, it's 5D chess, it's all part of the plan. I've remade the Middle East in a new way. If I were the president, I would come out and say, my goal all along was to end the forever wars by getting our military out of that region, and that's what I'm doing. I'm actually bringing us all home. Just declare victory. But what won't work is to let the Iranians drag it out till 2029, because then you are forever kind of wearing this albatross around your neck. I'll give you the last word here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. With the 60-day ceasefire MOU that J.D. Vance negotiated, it was mostly on Iranian terms. Virtually all of Iran's terms were incorporated. But at the strategic level, it made the most sense for the U.S. to have a strategic reset, to pull our forces out of the Middle East. We never should have had troops in the Middle East in the beginning. I mean, we made the first mistake probably with the first Gulf War. Reagan famously pulled all our troops out of the Middle East after the Marine barracks bombing. There was no strategic or national security rationale to keep troops there. We had standoff forces that worked, during the standoff with Iran over the Strait of Hormuz previously, in which we had superiority. But now we've just been exposed as a paper tiger, and this war threatens to embolden other potential aggressor states, certainly China being the foremost of those. That could exploit this window of vulnerability in which the U.S. is going to take 4 to 5 years to rebuild our depleted missile stocks, and that's under ideal conditions. If Trump expends the rest of our missile arsenal, we might as well just pull out all our troops out of Europe and in the Middle East and Africa and hunker down in the Western Hemisphere.
I'm not sure we shouldn't, and I think that many Americans would probably prefer it. Look. Trillions of dollars wasted over the last 40 years on these wars in the Middle East that did not make the world a better place, and it certainly didn't make our country better. David Pyne, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Ben. It's a great pleasure.
Well, tonight, another forced conscription video coming out of Ukraine. This time, a young man ripped out of his car while his girlfriend sits on his lap, shielding him, and screams. RT's Igor Zandov has the report tonight from the Donbass.
In terms when it comes to the authorities in Kiev, it seems their emotion is, well done. We need more videos like this. We need more effort like this. We need to exercise the government's monopoly on violence to the fullest extent, because they have been searching, they have been grabbing, basically kidnapping people off the streets. And it's pretty much nothing that an ordinary Ukrainian male can do to withstand, to fight back against these conscription officers, so to speak. Now, this is, according to Zelensky's own former press secretary, the true face of the regime in Kiev.
This is a face of real Zelensky, who could have allocated money for financial motivation, but decided to steal from the budget instead. The price is multiple lives and destroyed families. World, wake up. Ukraine needs peace.
Well, these videos, they aren't cherry-picked. You don't see Ukrainian propaganda showing videos of lines, forming at the entrances in the early morning of these conscription, draft offices and so on. All you see online is videos like this. Now, we're going to show you some of the latest ones that have sort of seeped through the cracks in the Ukrainian veil of censorship, so to speak. But these are also very, very distressing images, so be advised.
Знімай, що людині голову розбили, знімай.
Я сказала,
На, людина кров'ю стікає,
Кожного знімути, Я знаю, убиваю всіх! Сюди йди! Кожного знімлю,
Now, if you took the situation as it was maybe like a few months ago, maybe a year ago, still when the forced mobilization campaign was already in full swing, still these videos of, men bloodied in the streets, beaten up by conscription officers, they were still relatively rare. Now those emerge almost daily. So it really shows the pattern and where this whole thing is being taken, just how ever more violent these, officers become, ever more violent the forced mobilization campaign becomes. Here's another incident. For instance, a children's animator was stopped and, violence ensued as well.
I was going about my business in the city when a police officer stopped me and asked for my documents. I informed him that I had all of them with me. Then an unknown person in civilian clothes approached me and started shouting at me. I told him to calm down, saying that I was speaking with a police officer and would show my documents in a moment. After that, the person began to beat me. Another person in camouflage joined him. They dragged me out of my car. Once we were at the Territorial Recruitment Center, they beat me again. After they realized that all my documents were in order, they got even angrier. Because of that, they took me and beat me once more.
It's likely just a one-way road. It's a one-way street. They go to the front line. They remain there. I mean, Zelensky has been all over the place with the numbers of how many men Ukraine has lost at the battlefield. And just a few months ago, it was 55,000. Then he said it was 50,000, and the rest are just those unaccounted for. So families of those, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who have really perished in this war, these families, they have no chance at, getting even a financial compensation. Not that it would make the pain any less, not that it would ease the pain, really. Now, at the same time, as for the sentiment among the Ukrainian members of parliament, they are seeking to, uncover millions, literally millions of those who have been lucky enough to dodge this forced mobilization campaign and send them to the front line first.
We have roughly 2 million draft evaders who are unaccounted. We need to implement measures to identify them first. Only after they are on the radar can we evaluate our mobilization capacity, including those who are reserved or have legal deferrals.
So there you have it. There's not much that the Ukrainians can do back on their home soil because the conscription officers, they already have their hands pretty much untied. The only thing that is really left is for them to go knocking on people's door and then just, breaking into people's apartments and dragging them out of there as they do with vehicles now. But they could seek help elsewhere, like in Europe, for instance, and have those Ukrainians who are sheltering there deported back. And the diplomatic work is there. It is being done right now between Kiev and, European governments. So likely this whole situation is only to get only worse.
Well, tonight, a disturbing federal investigation is raising new questions about the safety of America's organ donation system. So the Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., says investigators found cases where the organ donation process moved forward even though patients were showing signs of life. Now the federal government is moving to shut down at least one of the organizations involved. American Now's Olivia Flynn has been looking into this for us tonight. Going to have a conversation with you about this. I got to tell you, this is probably the worst fear of people who would say, I look at the organ donation card on my driver's license. Do I want it? Do I not? And, people would always say, at least in the past, don't do that because they're more likely to kill you or to take your organs because they're going to get something out of it. Not just a conspiracy theory anymore.
It's not. It's a real-life horror film at this point. And essentially, this started with RFK looking into these cases. There was a case of 350 organ donation cases, and he was looking at these, and within those, there was 30% that raised flags. And essentially, these people weren't meeting the criteria to be organ donors, they were alive, and some of them were on life support. There was 28 cases where they were on life support, but those people were being considered for organ donors when there was a chance for them to live. But to your point, they saw it as, oh, their organs could do more for another life. So you're not being considered to save your life, you're being considered to save another life instead.
There's a lot of money in that world. You said 30% of the cases.
30% of the 350 cases.
That's incredible.
It's extremely high. And, you know, looking at it, you go to a hospital thinking, oh, maybe I'll check that off. And they put it on these files for you for patients coming in when you're in the ER. And you kind of look over, oh, do you want to be an organ donor, yes or no? But there's no actual description of what yes or no means. And essentially, you want to help other people. A human instinct is to be like, if I'm in that situation, I'm going to help someone else. But that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I'd rather you save someone else's life than my own first.
Well, it feels good to say, look, obviously people need those organs, kidneys and hearts and livers, and there's a reason to do it. I think it has a good meaning behind it, right? But then the whole system gets corrupted very quickly. And you talked to some experts about this.
Exactly. And just to point to RFK Jr., he basically wanted to decertify Network for Hope, which is this organ donating association. But I want to cut to a thought really quick on Mary O'Neill. She's the director of America's Future. And she was talking about how important it is really for people to have an advocate when you're signing off on these organ donors. Let's listen to it.
So it is very, very important that people understand that prior to that getting there, you need to have an advocate and you need to make it very clear as to what they can take and what they cannot take.
Yeah. Okay, so somebody goes into the hospital, they're in a car crash, whatever it might be, they're on life support, but they're surviving, they have a chance, they've got that card, right, that organ donor card. So how does someone who's showing those signs of life, who's making this decision? Who's deciding, let's pull the plug? Who's deciding, you made a comment earlier, maybe those organs could do more to help more people than just this one life. So who's ultimately deciding that, and how can you bring accountability into this?
Well, it should really start with the patient who's coming in. But it's, again, having the knowledge of what it actually means when you're signing off. I mean, you come in, you're in a car accident, you just want to be treated really quickly. You're signing off, oh, okay, worst case, yeah, I'll be an organ donor, but that doesn't mean worst case, don't help me first. And so essentially it has to start there. I think there needs to be more education for patients coming in really understanding what they're signing off on, but also hospitals being transparent with that. And Mary O'Neill also commented on there's a solution, and I think that solution is auditing hospitals and seeing who is overseeing this aspect of it.
And ultimately auditing would have to come through the federal government, I would assume. Health and Human Services, Bobby Kennedy and his organization that he's overseeing, the department, I should say, that he's overseeing there. Very quickly, is anybody going to go to jail? I mean, if you're looking at 30% of the cases that they were looking at, 350, that's over 100 cases, right, of this happening. Is someone going to get charged? Is this getting referred to the DOJ?
Well, you know how it is. It's
work?
always pointing fingers in different directions.
Sure.
But I think right now it's looking at what organizations the hospitals are partnered with, because really the motivation is the incentive, is the money behind, you know, these organ donor procurement organizations being like, we want these organs and we need them for other people. So it's really drawing the line between where they're allowed to step in and being like, there's a list of people who need these organs, and oh, this is a real life person we have here, let's treat them first.
I mean, at minimum, you would think there's a massive lawsuit, class action lawsuit coming from the families of people whose organs were taken, who came in early.
Yes.
It just feels like it should be referred for a criminal matter, right? It absolutely does. And it's stopping short of that again, because it feels like that's where we always stop short, would be a problem. Olivia Flynn, great job.
Thank you.
Very interesting story. All right, folks, that is America Now for now. I'm Ben Swann. For more stories, be sure to check out our website, rt.com, and join us every night at 7, 8, 9, and 10 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching. Have a great night. Remember to question everything.